I know, Kevin, you need to leave a little bit earlier. So I was thinking about the last meeting is that your class is almost over and all your COIL and virtual exchange sessions were done. And so it would be nice to talk about your outcomes today. And if you could have any examples that you want to highlight. I'm particularly interested in some of the artifacts that you feel free to share, with your permission to this group, whether it's here through share screen or later on with an email. So we know some of the students' work and maybe your personal kind of assignments or whatever you like to share. That might help others to think about how to do both synchronous and asynchronous virtual exchange, and what is the, how do you see that, what could be improved, what could be done, what worked the best for this semester and things like that. I think we did talk about, what you thought about how we could do your virtual exchange last time, but I'd like to hear a little bit more now. The class is over and almost over with a week. So if I don't know if Kevin, you have the any video you want to show us, or you want to just talk about it?
Said I will talk about it and I'll send you the video later. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we finished up, and as Wing Kai said, this was totally asynchronous. And Sophie, who is the research assistant for the Hong Kong COIL group, she provided a lot of assistance in helping us coordinate and bring this together. So for example, the videos that we did, she made sure that they were organized and made logical sense when we showed them to our respective classes. So we did videos where there was a scenario. So teachers from both University of Hong Kong and BSU had to pretend like they were going to be interviewed to go work in these respective countries. So we had one student from University of Hong Kong to interview one of our BSU students as if she was going to come here to teach in an early childhood classroom. And then vice versa for the Hong Kong and BSU students. And the videos came out pretty good. My students came to my office and did their videos. And Sophie arranged them so that they synced up and made sense. So it was like they were interviewing each other from these different countries in this asynchronous format. And my students really, they were very interested in what the Hong Kong students had to say about early childhood education and how it works in Hong Kong in general, and how it works in particular with their pre-service educational program. And I think I noted last time that one of the questions posed by one of the Chinese students was, what is the percentage of Asians who are in Bridgewater? And my students did their homework and they said, oh, a little over 3%. But she made the point that even though some of the early childhood classrooms in Bridgewater, most of them are homogenous, with white people being the majority, she said it was still important to have competence around cultural competence and cultural humility. So was really glad that she made that point, that even when you're in majority school districts of color or majority white school districts, these kinds of conversations still need to happen. And they examined they examined the unit plan from the University of Hong Kong and compared it to our unit plan, which included looking at their lesson plans. So we did a bit of that in class. And if I were to do this again in the future, I would certainly build in more opportunities for the students to get to know each other. I'm thinking about the suggestion that Minai made in a pre-meeting about the Google Doc, having them do a Google slide to introduce themselves, both at the University of Hong Kong, both and BSU. And I would also do some the students here at BSU would do a little short video clip to introduce themselves to the students at the University of Hong Kong. And I would ask Alfredo and Sophia if they could do the same with the students there from the University of Hong Kong, so that we can get a better sense and know one another a little better, because the videos were the highlight of this exchange for my students. They were very much interested in hearing directly from the students, even more so, and not a surprise, even more so than hearing from Alfredo when he did his videos. So I'll stop there, and as I said, I'll make sure that you get these artifacts when Kyle sends the videos and some of the other artifacts.
What kind of format for the videos do you use? Just the MP4s or uploading to YouTube or through the learning system or Flipgrid?
We use Zoom. So they just came to my office and did a Zoom recording.
Zoom recording.
And the same thing with Alfredo and Sophie. They did Zoom recordings.
And how long are the videos?
They total probably less than 10 minutes.
I see. And I don't know if I caught what you said about how many videos they were exchanged.
Yes. So, so students at the University of Hong Kong viewed the 2 sets of videos, and the students here at BSU also viewed the videos. So in one set of videos, the Hong Kong student is asking questions of a BSU student about what it would be like to work in an early childhood classroom here in Bridgewater or the surrounding communities. And the same thing, one of my BSU students asked University of Hong Kong student what it would be like to work in an early childhood classroom in Hong Kong. So they worked on their interview questions before the actual interview, of course, and they were prepared to kind of engage in this conversation.
Were they role playing, or were they actually exactly the Hong Kong students were interviewed directly by our students, and our students were interviewed directly, synchronous video recording, or is it role playing?
It's role playing.
So our students would, some of them would be Hong Kong students, some of them would be Bridgewater students, and then they would just play out the scenario.
Yeah, notice, the scenario was, the question was, you're going to apply for a job in the other school system. So for example, my student Maria was going to apply for a job at in an early childhood classroom in Hong Kong. And she wanted to know, well, how do I prepare for that? What is it going to be like to work in one of these classrooms? So they, of course, they had to bring in what they were learning in their courses to talk about what it would be like to work in our 2 different early childhood environments. So it kind of tied in what they needed to do for the course by way of this kind of mock interview.
I see. Yeah, thank you. I think that's really a great start to really using the format of videos and engage the students, because it's easier to, you know, learn about what actually happened through images and videos instead of just reading. I'm glad that you were able to manage that. Are there any questions from the group for Kevin? Why don't we start with the asynchronous elements first before we talk about the synchronous COIL? So, Alexandra, other than the beginning session, and what happened after that?
I forgot what was the last time that I updated you where we were at that moment, but we had one synchronous meeting for everyone, for both of the groups at the beginning. And then students had two synchronous meetings, but in small groups, in groups of 4. And the first meeting was more for my students to get to know the Japanese students, their culture and their language. And the Japanese students prepared kind of mini lessons or mini lessons about their language and culture to introduce those aspects to my students. And that helped my students get to know the Japanese students better, and then plan a lesson for the following Zoom meeting, again in small groups. And that's when they met for the second time in small groups. And my students taught a mini lesson to the Japanese students. And there was a lot of feedback in between. So my students designed lesson plans and sent it to me and to Wana, who is my partner from the university in Japan. And she provided feedback to them, and I provided feedback to my students. So it was very helpful that she was so cooperative, and it was actually her initiative to also provide feedback, because she knows the context of her student, of her class, and it was helpful for my students too. So we provided that feedback, and students revised, and then they met and implemented that lesson with the Japanese students. And I participated in one of these small groups in both of the meetings on Zoom. And I found it really helpful for me to know the inside, kind of dynamics and what's going on there. And even moving forward, if students continue to work in small groups like that without us, the instructors, being in the groups, I really want to participate again in 1 or 2 sessions like this, just to not to take over, to assess them or put pressure on them, but just for me to learn what's going on there. And it was very helpful because I could really tell how they broke the ice, and they were much more comfortable communicating with each other. So it was their third meeting, 1 whole class, then 2 small group. And I really noticed how they felt much more comfortable with each other. They were smiling, they were joking, they asked questions, and they really showed curiosity. And it was great to see that happening. And so now at this stage, my students filled out kind of a self-assessment, self-reflection. Not even forms, but like they wrote papers to reflect on their own development through this, particularly through that stage when they were teaching the lesson. And they also provided feedback to the Japanese students, and the Japanese students provided feedback to my students. So we shared that, and they exchanged feedback to each other, which was great. And now my students are working on the final projects, the PowerPoints that they would narrate. When they in those PowerPoints, they reflect on the whole experience, COIL experience. So I haven't received those yet. They are due by the end of this week, actually, actually tomorrow on Saturday. And that's where I will be able to see the very final products for my students. later next week, they will respond to each other's PowerPoint presentations in the discussion board on Blackboard, and they will record both the Japanese students and my students. They will record final videos to say kind of thank you and goodbye to each other, and they will post them to Padlet. And that's something they did at the very beginning as well in week 1 of the COIL project, when they recorded introduction videos and responded to each other on Padlet as well. So that will be the final part. Next week will be the final concluding part of the COIL project. And I'm still waiting to get those assignments that they're working on, and to see how they feel about it. But so far, based on what I read from their self-assessments on the second meeting, Zoom meeting, and then the KWL that they filled out throughout the whole experience, they have very positive experiences, and every paper that I've read, they feel very positive about it, and they feel like it was a meaningful experience. And they even the Japanese students, it was interesting. We met with one this weekend. She said that they didn't know that it was the COIL project was coming to an end, and that they wouldn't have more Zoom meetings, and they were kind of really upset because they thought that they would meet again and they would have other tasks to work on with my students. So yeah, that's where I am at this point.
That's great. When you have the small group meetings for 4 students, 2 on each side, was it one? Did they just do the 2-on-2 conversations and discussion about teaching English, or is it breaking out 1-on-1 further?
No, they were doing the whole group of 4. They were doing it together. So the first meeting was when the Japanese students were introducing more about their culture and language and teaching something interesting. So they were doing origami right there in that session, the one that I attended. It was really great because we took a piece of paper, and we were doing that with them. But yes, so we didn't break them further into smaller groups. They were in the same group of 4 for both of the Zoom meetings, small group Zoom meetings that they had.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please finish your thought.
I just wanted to say that, so my students were acting as if they were co-teaching, and those 2 students were both as if they were their students. But in the first meeting, it was the opposite way, when those 2 students were kind of co-teaching or co-facilitating, and my students were both learning from them.
Yeah. So I think that's a different model from Fernanda, which is more 1-on-1, and then you're 2-on-2, and for a few sessions, but with a lot of work in between, and not just focusing on those conversations. And I know that you and I were going to discuss those full COIL in detail for Karen and Alexandra, who've spent 6 weeks on connecting the 2 classes totally together. And that's the project that we're going to present. And also Emily is going to also has another panel on, we're talking about the OTL conference next Thursday that Emily is going to explain her project as well. I know Ashley is going to join you, right? Even though she's not going.
And Naveed, actually, Naveed as well. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And I know Kevin has to leave in 4 minutes, but I like to say that I'm actually contacted by Sophie, probably not so, not Alfredo this time, but the coordinator. I don't know if her name is Sophie or Sophie is the grad assistant, probably the other faculty member. They are also have 2 more classes. They want to do some exchanges. So I will let you know and let Sue know about that, and see if there's other interest for next semester for you guys or for another faculty member in early childhood education.
Yeah, thank you, Wing Kai. And I just wanted to say, Alexandra, I like that feedback exchange idea. And if I do this again, I'm taking that idea.
Yeah,
and definitely will be incorporating that.
Yeah.
So I was like jotting down notes as you were talking. And we'll watch the video so that I can learn from Fernanda and Inkyang and Emily, since I will miss what you all have to say. So I'm going to go now for the 10 o'clock meeting. So it's a Racial Equity Council meeting. So we'll Zoom.
Yeah, make the video available to you, all of you after this. That's why I like to record it and make sure that everyone would utilize the video last time and this time to think about how we can continue this or do something different in the future. Thank you.
Great. So, yep, enjoy your weekend.
Yeah. I know Emily would need to leave in 10 minutes. So Emily, I'd like to turn to you next. And you're the other way around with totally intensive 12 sessions.
Yeah, and Kate can actually speak to it as well. It's very similar to what Alexandra was just mentioning. I was really moved by the positive note that we ended on and just how engaged everybody was. Like it was palpable. And I'd say that was really what I was most struck by. During the second to last session, there was this really engaging dialogue where everybody was fighting and had different ideas and opinions. But it was so passionate and involved. Like it showed me, I was sitting back watching with my video off because I try not to be too involved in the student discussions, and thinking to myself, like, for everybody who thinks that you can't get crazily engaged on Zoom, like this, it can happen with the right facilitation. So the Game Changers, team really did a great job facilitating. And then in terms of the integration into my classes, it's been a little tricky because my students are spread out over different classes. But what I did is I did a Google form reflection where they filled out a Google form, and I'm going to remind a couple students who have yet to fill it out, but I had them write their responses about, integration into their experiences and how it went. I also am having a focus group that's coming up soon where we're going to debrief. So because it's not during class time, but across classes, I'm going to talk to the students in a focus session, which Wing Kai, I think you might join that on the 8th potentially, where we really are going to debrief. And then it's just happened where the students in each individual class who've been participating in this project get to be a bit of a leader in the class, which has been really exciting. It's almost like a reciprocal teaching model where, because they're participating in Game Changers, they get to take on a little bit more of a voice in my classes during the synchronous class time. We always say, oh, tell us what's going on in Game Changers and how that connects. And the connections in particular about intercultural competence development and the role around strategy, learning strategies for negotiation has really been exciting. And I'm looking forward to potentially integrating this into a spring course where all the students or most of the students could participate, but we're still working out the details on that. I don't know if Kate has anything from a student perspective that she would like to add.
Yeah, sure. I definitely agree with everything that you were saying, Emily, about the engagement of all the students, especially towards the end. And I think part of that also came from having all those interactions throughout the entire semester as well. It's like we all really started to get to know each other. And so then it was like there were just certain people that everybody kind of gravitated towards too, I suppose. Like some people I was like more friendly with than others, but I mean, the whole group was just it was a great dynamic. And one thing that I really liked as well was before we even started the sessions, the students filled out like a Google form, just kind of like, oh, tell us about yourself, the school you're at, that generic information, but also like give us an example of a situation where you've had to negotiate, and then just kind of what are you hoping to learn from the class. So now that we've actually gone through the class and we've taken away all these lessons, they're going to have us fill out another survey, which they actually just sent this morning, just kind of saying like, oh, what are your concluding thoughts, and just blah, blah, blah. What have you learned from all of this? And so it was really kind of like a nice format for takeaway, I suppose, because it really it's utilizing that reflection part that I think like every class always wants to have, like kind of what did you learn from this? What did you take away from this? And especially since this was really kind of like the first like session that this initiative had, is really important to kind of get our feedback as they continue to develop this for new sessions. But I definitely, I learned a lot about kind of myself, negotiation, what it can be like to debate, and just seeing how like other people interact as well in different debating situations, and just sort of kind of like learning how to navigate, okay, how do I take this away into real world situations. So
Yeah,
I really like that. Yeah.
I appreciate that comment, Kate. That's another feedback piece that I've received a lot, is that everyone had expectations in the beginning about what it would be like to interact with a person from Israel, or a person who's Muslim, or a person who's from the United States. Like, they really had these stereotypes, which are very deeply ingrained, right? And they really had them break down quite significantly throughout the program, which was really exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a really nice opportunity for cross-cultural engagement. And I met some really great people. And one thing that I really liked as well was Game Changers created a whole website as well that only the students could access, because it had like our stories about who we were, what we want to do in the program as well. So then it's kind of like when we even weren't in the sessions, if we wanted to, we had this platform where we got to know each other as well. Kind of like, oh, this person likes this type of music, I like that type of music too. And so it was just really nicely done by Avi and Shantae, with the help of all the professors, including Emily, to really kind of like get us all to know each other and get comfortable, because we were talking about different situations, like how can some serious situations, like how can leaders and educators in the world today, what can they learn from negotiation? That was really kind of like our last session, kind of like, how do these skills help the world today? Like, how can you implement these skills to help the world today? So it was just a really great experience overall.
I'm glad that it was for you, even though you didn't have the class, the connection back to class piece. So it's great to hear your perspective, and I wish I had you as a student as well, because that would have been nice. But thank you very much, Kate.
Yeah, it feels like it's beneficial not just to our students, and definitely to the Israeli students who participated in it. It's like 30 students altogether, is that right? About 10 for each side, and they met over a period of 12 sessions for 6 weeks, and adding the holidays, they were engaging for almost like 2 months altogether. Yeah, I think the so-called conflict resolution or negotiation, especially in the curriculum, there are a lot of virtual programs that really connect to COIL. So we're talking about two different models. One is COIL class-to-class collaborations. The other one is the outside class, entirely standing alone virtual workshops. And then there's the virtual curriculum and virtual program that this represents. But then there are also somewhere in between. Some people really utilize the outside, like what Kevin just did with that particular outside assignments, outside the regular synchronous elements. And what Alexandra is trying to do is to really integrate the two very closely together throughout the 6 weeks, 8 weeks that her students are working in 3 different ways, like synchronous meetings, asynchronous assignments, and also synchronous big class together in the beginning. Yeah, so I think you see the different models, and I think Inkyong also connect to what the Israel programs, because you're trying to do debates, and they have a lot of debates over there as well, but not with just 2 positions. So there's a little bit different. From what you learned this semester versus last time you did, do you have any takeaways?
Sure. This is my 2nd year, so I can compare my experience to the last year's, which is great. I have, both aspects, positive and kind of, negative aspects. Positives, all same students, particularly the political systems. We hear from news articles about, what other, people in other countries, believe in their systems, but students appreciated how they can hear directly from the constituents in those countries. So sort of, interviewing people who are living with a different political system and how they have lived with those different political systems. So students appreciated to meet people and ask what they think about their political systems, which are different from each other. So that was really great. But I want to focus on the challenges today that I encountered. This is Zoom sessions. I had 2 Zoom sessions. Last year, I had 3 Zoom sessions. One ice-breaking session. So we didn't go over any particular debate topic. We had solely focused on introducing ourselves and the asset maps, using asset maps, what kind of assets can they bring to our conversations, and sort of, ice-breaking activities, 1 session, and 2 separate debate sessions. Last year, we found a little awkwardness in the ice-breaking sessions. They haven't met them before, but all of a sudden they are asked to introduce themselves, ask questions to the others. That was a little awkward, so we removed that session. And this year we experimented, just to start with the 2 sessions, but we encourage students to introduce each other in the very beginning of each breakout group session. And I asked my students what they think about, no ice break session. And they said the whole ice break session, separate section, will be awkward. They agreed, but they said, before starting the debates, they wanted the kind of a separate time to, it's just, shorter version of ice breaking and introducing themselves to get to know each other a little bit better. So warming up was lacking this time. So I will consider that lesson. And the other one is, not turning on the video like Jabbar today. Jabbar, I'm not blaming you at all. But, students, I encouraged many times students to turn on the camera because it's international exchange. Without seeing their faces, how can we exchange our views? So strongly encouraged. And my students, PhD students, were more mindful about my instructions, but the Korean students, they didn't listen to my instructions that well. So I was a little upset, but I told for the second, the debate, I told the other professor from Yonsei University in South Korea to encourage his students, but he said a lot of privacy issues. So he didn't want to he didn't want to force them to turn on cameras, which is really understanding. The other thing is the participation kind of discrepancies between BSU students and Korean students. So when we came back to the usual classroom, I asked my students, what was your experience? So any comments? And one student, he kind of criticized the lack of participation. Jabbar, turn off your camera. I feel bad. My friend.
So in a car or something? Garage?
It's funny. So one student was really critical, complaining about the lack of participation of Korean students, and I knew it and I felt it, and I know it should be addressed. But I told him, I took that moment as a learning moment about the social justice, which was great. And I asked him if he speaks any second language. He said no. And imagine how you would feel when you have to debate with your second language. And he nodded. And so that was a really critical moment for the class. And then a few other students, 3 students joined in the conversation, disagreeing with him, and they said they had really nice experiences with the breakout group teammates. So I see the variations depending on breakout groups. Some breakout groups were very silent, particularly Korean students were silent and hesitant to share their views. But some breakout groups were very active. But I think, that was really a good educational moment about thinking about, the kind of, I don't want to say imperialism, but, the English as a lingua franca, as taking it for granted. So I think I will talk about it before the debates about those potential kind of participation discrepancies next years, so that students are aware and respect why Korean students can be reserved in terms of English. That's it.
I attended those sessions, so I also observed what was going on, and I feel that definitely there's a small number of students who, for some reason, who decided not to turn on their cameras for both sides, but mostly maybe 4 or 5 from the South Korean side. It's not like the whole group. So I think I don't know if there's successful COIL requires both faculty members to have a lot of coordination and discussion about how to develop their course. Probably it's different from a webinar or lecture style, when in Asia, most of the lectures are offered by faculty in the Zoom classes, and then the students just turn off their cameras and listen to the lecturer. And probably they had less experience for breakout rooms and turning on the cameras for everyone to discuss their issues together. So if Dr. Park can really think about that, this is different from what a traditional Korean classroom would be operating. And you folks have an opportunity to talk about this in advance and maybe even prepare some materials before they go to the Zoom sessions. Because I think you're developing it more on the content level, require students to do certain assignments based on their knowledge of political systems. And some of those were covered in the classes before, and some of them may not have been covered before. So students might need a little bit more background information or material to simplify the questions, to a little bit more visual, so that they can be more prepared to talk when they're in the breakout rooms. On the whole, South Korean students from Yonsei fall into 2 groups. Some of them have really excellent English because they grew up in the States or spent some time in the States and returned back to South Korea. Some of them were not as much. They were just spending their whole lives in South Korea as well. So I see differences even among the South Korean students in terms of their English proficiency. I know that that's really how instructors need to take it into account different levels of students and try to help them and meet where they are, instead of requiring everyone the same kind of academic standard for English. So I am glad that you told your students that, everyone's different. They cannot really assume that, everyone need to suddenly, be totally eloquent in discussing everything. But I really would like to encourage the icebreaker session, because I think among all the student groups, your students are really focusing on doing the tasks and not focusing on, exchanging the cultures and the way in which politics is understood, from their personal experience. They're focusing on answering the questions and doing the tasks. And so I think it would be nice to really mix them up a little bit and don't worry too much about just focusing on the content, but focusing on the experience of understanding South Korea and understanding the United States on a deeper level. So So
hearing from our group today, I've got two ideas. I think assigning a facilitator in each round of the debate in each breakout room will be helpful. Student facilitator, so take the ownership and then kind of, to be more active, the exercising their leadership. And then second thing is the last session, I want to add one more session, like, interviewing each other. So to ask more direct questions based on their personal experiences on their educational life, and the political life. So I can ask students to develop some interview questions to the counterparts. And then they can be separated in each breakout group, one-on-one maybe, and that they can ask questions. So interview sounds more instructed in terms of format, but they can have very personal kind of contact on the other. Thank you for the great ideas today.
If I could just quickly go off of what Dr. Toe is saying and what you're saying too, Dr. Kim, I noticed in my own observations, I was able to attend the first debate, and I did see some students stepping up to that role of kind of being the facilitator. I noticed a few of your students, more so the Bridgewater students, but I did see a South Korean student or two from my memory saying, oh, who else has anything that they want to contribute? Or, guys, I feel like I've been talking way too much. Like, someone else pipe in and tell me your observations. So I really like that idea that you just had of having a student facilitator, because sometimes as well, I forget who was talking. Oh, Alexandra, I think it was you who was talking about it. But the students, when they have that chance to interact with each other, they feel more comfortable. And I think having a student facilitator rather than like a faculty or even like a research or graduate assistant, if someone was to help out, I think that would be a wonderful idea to really kind of encourage that connection and also just help break the ice even a little bit further after your first icebreaker session, because it's like, okay, now we kind of know each other. So it's like, let's encourage each other to share our ideas. So I think that's an excellent idea. And I really liked, I just had to pipe in as well, I really liked what you said to your student there about, oh, did you speak a second language? Like, try and imagine yourself in their place. And I feel like that was like a perfect example of really highlighting those cultural differences and why having something like COIL is very important for education, because it offers us those opportunities to learn about those different cultures and to realize, okay, I need to take a step back almost because this culture is not like my culture. It's not like it is here in the US. So learning to be respectful and then also wanting to learn about other cultures. I just really liked how that one thing you said to that student, I felt really kind of summed up one of the things we're trying to do, encouraging those connections.
Thank you, Kate, for these reflections. I agree with you too. I know that you were talking about the Inkyun was talking about whether student facilitators or faculty should play a larger role, and Alexandra also mentioned that whether you wanted to observe the students, and that happened in the Israel situation too. I know that Fernandez and her counterpart trying not to participate in the student conversations, but I was wondering, how do you know what your students did and what the outcomes would be? Could you share?
Yes, thank you. I'm learning a lot in this session about what to do, especially with relation to feedback, which is something that I struggle with because I wanted to make sure my students were independent, and I wanted to sort of like let them continue to negotiate the linguistic learning that they were doing, right? Because as you know from second language acquisition, that students don't learn a second language by reading what's on page 28 of the French book, right? So learning the conjugation is not going to make you able to actually say those things in a real context, real conversation. So, and the other thing is that we don't know what are the needs and what are the what are the needs, the linguistic needs for each student in each of those dyads, right? So I had 17 students paired up with 17 Brazilian students, and we had 5 sessions. We're going to have our last session next Tuesday. It's going to be our last session. In between the sessions, I had a very informal conversation with my students in class the week after they met in their individual conversations. And they reported to me some of the interesting ideas about vocabulary learning that they had. And the biggest takeaway for them, and they shared this with me, was the fact that the Brazilian students were so much more English dominant. Like they knew so much more English than they knew Portuguese. And that's because of the nature of the groups, right? So my group was a Portuguese 101, and the students in Brazil were English majors. So they were already, more English dominant, and sort of like that echoes the situations in other COIL arrangements where English is the lingua franca, for the debates and for, conversations about educational scenarios. But for my particular experience, that actually, it helped a little bit because my students were able to actually have the conversation. The idea was to spend 20 to 25 minutes in Portuguese and 20 to 25 minutes in English and let them negotiate the conversation, right? But what actually happened, and this is a problem, was that it was more like 80% English because my students were so hesitant and they just didn't know how to negotiate the meaning. There were a couple of students, Brazilian students, who did not know as much English. And I experienced that because one of my students was absent and I had to substitute for my student who was absent. And so I talked to the English speaker, to the Brazilian, and I used English the whole entire time. And he struggled with the English. And so like before the meeting, we had some prompts, right? So the prompts was like, what are your favorite foods? What are your routines? And instead of sort of like just concentrating on the conjugations of the verb that has to do with routines, I'm like, okay, so here are the things that you could say about your routines and here how you conjugate. And then you can use that to talk to your partner. So they did that. One of the things that I want to do, and these are the problems, these are the challenges, right? The number one is the feedback, because there's got to be a way to find out, okay, how did the session go? And my partner in Brazil required journaling for each of her students. I didn't require it because this is the first time I'm doing this, so I wasn't really sure how to get that feedback other than an informal conversation in the next session, in the next lesson that I had with my students. So one thing that I'm going to require is sort of like that self-reflection, that self-assessment, and sort of like figuring out one of the questions I want to ask them is like, after the first meeting, what are the stereotypes, as somebody else mentioned here today, what are the stereotypes that you had about Brazilians? Like, what did you think of Brazilians? And, and how has that changed after this conversation? And the other thing I would say is that about meetings with, skipping meetings, I had a lot of attrition. I would say, I mean, out of the 17 students that I had 4 or 5 that had trouble either meeting with their, like being absent. A couple of students were absent and a couple of students had, I mean, life happens, right? So they have like a doctor's appointment and COVID and all the stuff. But they had trouble. One of the requirements, and I agree with my partner, Brazilian, the professor in Brazil, was that they had to set up a time to meet with their conversational partner before the next teletundra meeting, before the next exchange. And so and some of them were able to do it because all of them were in WhatsApp. All of them had exchanged their contact information, so they were able to, and I didn't require specifically, it has to be Flickr or it has to be WhatsApp or it has to be Zoom. You guys can figure it out. And so that was a lesson for me to sort of like hands off, you guys are independent. And for me, it reinforced the fact that I should not micromanage everything. And I have to let the students be adults and, figure out if they missed a meeting, they can go in and set up the meeting. But I need that feedback. And one of the things that my Brazilian partner required, the professor required, was that if they missed a meeting, she needed to know when they met, how they met, what was the takeaway, and how they redid that session that they missed. And she also did a lot of feedback for me. She was like, okay, so your student didn't meet, your student didn't show up. I mean, it was a minority, I have to say. Most of them were there, but that was an issue that I have. The last thing I'm gonna say is that because my last meeting with my students, the actual last class is an international exchange, I'm not gonna have time to actually meet with my students and kind of like figure out what to do. I mean, like do a review for the final exam, for example. So one of the things I'm going to do, and this is the same thing that my Brazilian partner did, was after the session, so they're in the Zoom call, they're in their dyads, right? After the session, we all go back to the main room. And one of the things that I want to do is let's all go back to the main room and then have a discussions about the positives and the negatives. And that's going to be for the last session. And so one of the things that I want to do is, in conjunction with the final exam that they are required to do, I want them to do a self-reflection piece to sort of like tie in everything together. And I might do this in either Google Forms so that everybody can see what are the themes, or I might just do individual where they send it to me. So those are my ideas today.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that there's an opportunity for them to debrief and also reflect, just like Alexandra's requirements for last reflection. It doesn't have to be PowerPoint, and it could be, paragraphs or, a few sentences. At least there's a feedback. So there are different multiple ways of assessment. Sometimes it's surveys, sometimes it's an assignment based on PowerPoint, sometimes it's kind of just feedback based on oral reflections. But without any feedback, then we don't know actually what students are learning and what students are doing. And I like the balanced approach of handing off their free time to interact and engage, but also allowing the time to learn about what they do. So this is what Israel's programs tries to do every day. There's plenty of opportunities of interaction. I really, we have just, 1 minute. I wanted to talk about two things. One is we are in the SUNY COIL network, and over the last few weeks, I've engaged Alexandra a little bit with meeting other people who are doing COIL, or there's a pedagogy group, there's a culture group, there's also, so they have these coordinators meetings that sometimes I'm asked to go, but if I cannot go, I sometimes see if other people would be interested in going, just based on the BSU virtual exchange experience. So what I'm saying is that these are free professional developments and learning opportunities that are open all to this group, and you guys have the first right to accept or reject these opportunities. So I'm not asking you to do things for me. I'm asking you to, if you're interested, you're welcome to meet people from other cultures and other countries. Secondly, I also received requests, particularly from Brazil, that I'd like to follow up with Fernanda and see, we have people asking from Brazilian institutions. We also have people asking from Mexico. So I'm going to follow up with the Global Languages Department and Literatures Department a little bit more about, the working with Latin America and working with South America. Finally, I think I'm trying to make sure that people who are continuing next semester will get the same support, and people who are not doing it the same class next semester may be able to support other people to do it, or doing it in a different class. For example, Incon, if she's not doing it with Dr. Park, but Asian Studies, the Intro to Asian Studies class, there are other opportunities of meeting students from Asia to learn about Asian Studies. That might be a good opportunity to do some of that work. So I'm going to contact you and Chen and Sean and talk about this idea of doing COIL, some virtual exchange with the Intro to Asian Studies. I'm going to talk to Fernanda about Portugal not Portugal, Brazil. I'm going to talk to Kevin about early childhood. There's some follow-up with Hong Kong. They have asked 2 more classes. And I'm going to see Alexandra, and you will be doing the same class next semester.
So I would love to do, and Juana would love to do as well, my partner from Japan, but we discussed our schedules briefly, and it looks like they don't match because they start their semester so late that, or for some, she has the same group of students, and I didn't get all the details, but it looks like we will have only about 3 weeks that overlap. And we will either do something over just 3 weeks, something different because of the time, so it will be compressed, or, I mean, I would love to do even if it's 3 weeks. I will talk to her again and ask her why can we not do it at the beginning of our semester based on our schedule. But based on what she told me, for some reason, like there is no overlap other than 3 weeks. So, but she would love to do it, and I would love to do it even with the 3 weeks. So we'll talk more about it with her, and then I will let you know.
Yeah, I think it's worth doing it even if it's 3 weeks in April. But on the other hand, if there are other opportunities for your students to do half of it with maybe with Mexico, because they are asking for some kind of teaching English or Hong Kong. That might be more complicated. You do half with another country and half with the other country. So we'll have to talk.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about it and see if it's possible, if but also to make sure that it's not too overwhelming for the students if it's the same class. I teach actually another class, and I'm still waiting to know more about that opportunity that I just found out about Cambodia, and you were CC'd on that. So if that works out, then I can use my other class for that. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to different opportunities, and I'll be happy to discuss it further.
Yeah. I don't know, Karen, whether you confused the time. It's 9:30 to 10:30 instead of 10:30 to 11:30.
Yeah, it was. I had it jotted down, and we ended up with something that happened in our department. So I was dealing with a meeting that was supposed to be half an hour, and it went much longer. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have to sign off in a minute to John Michael Zimmerman to talk about Mexico, and he's meeting with the Mexican partner as we speak for another COIL next semester. But we were just everyone talk about the outcomes, and maybe I know that this time, did you observe anything different from last time, or in terms of the outcome of the final projects that students presented? I know that's been a while.
Yeah, our students are going to present their final projects on Wednesday night, so we're still. Oh
yeah, you have one more meeting. I forgot.
Yeah, so we're still working. It's been a little bit more challenging because we've had more challenges with communication in the last few weeks. So I'm hoping that we have some good projects. I met with my students on Wednesday night, and they needed a push. They needed to do much more collaboration rather than sort of parallel work. So that was a challenge. I'm not sure that we are at the same place that we ended up last year. So we'll see. Sometimes it's a really great last week. So I'm hoping that with the guidance I gave them, that they're continuing to do more collaborative work rather than parallel work. So time will tell. One more week.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to ask Lelki whether there are other professors in TGU who might be interested in COIL, that we can connect with other faculty members in College of Education and help?
Sure, I'll talk with him, and let me put that as a note. Definitely can do that. Yep.
Right. Basically, I think there's some interest. Sarah Thomas is talking to me about doing COIL as well.
Okay.
In secondary ed, and the last semester, Jackie, both in elementary ed, was a little bit interested, but not following up yet. So there are pockets of interest, either with Tokyo or Hong Kong or Ireland. These are totally education universities. Mm-hmm. So I just thought that they have an international division for offering English classes, and
Okay.
those might be an opportunity for our students. Because I think for Yonsei and for TGU, we are too much dependent on the two faculty who are a collaborative partner, but not institutional partnerships. So
Okay.
it's nice to have Yonsei, you know, and reach out. I'll reach out to Dr. Shim that I worked with before. Maybe I can work with him. So it's not just, you know, two people working together. And I know that it's a start. And that applies to Brazil and applies to Japan that, you know, Alexandra is working on too. But it would be nice to think about this broader. It's not just, you know, between one professor and the other professor, but between one university and the other university. I hope it makes sense.
Yep, I'll definitely do my part to reach out and see if we can expand it for sure.
Yeah, as you know, we do collaborations for guest lectures. It's been going on throughout the last 2 years, but we didn't do the collaborations for COIL other than both of you. So I'm wondering whether other professors are interested. They might not be doing the 6 weeks like what you did, but if they could do 3 weeks, 2 weeks, that's still a start, right?
Okay, yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right, I also have to step out, so I don't miss the conversations about Mexico too much. It's nice talking to all of you.
Thank you so much, Minkai. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so don't forget about next Thursday. Listen to, if you have time, there are 2 sessions. One is by Alexandra, Karen, and me. The other one is by Emily and Ashley and Navid. And everyone will talk about virtual exchange. One is at 11, the other one is 1, I think.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Winkai and Karen, I just wanted to tell you, so I'll put together a draft and send of a PowerPoint and send it to you. I'll be working on it today. Would you like me to share it as a shared slides on, what is it called, OneDrive, instead of just having a file for that, so that you can add there as well for your parts?
I would say if it's editable, that would be easier, but also know that whatever works for you, because if I have to create a slide or 2 that we can then add, it's fine. Whatever works easier for you, I think is key.
Okay, I think with the design, you know, if you use a regular PowerPoint with the Microsoft, then they offer those design features, which are really nice.
I like that, don't you?
So yeah, I like it a lot. So maybe I will use that, and I will just send you a PowerPoint and you can add slides. And I believe, Winkai, would you like to start the presentation, because you will have kind of